happened just last week, the final days I had at home before heading back to college. My name is Evan. I nearly didn't write this down, but the image of that basement won't leave me. My parents, Mark and Claire, moved into a smaller place after I graduated. They'd been talking about downsizing for years and finally did it when I left for school. Because of the timing, I'd only been back a few times and they'd given me a quick tour. There's no basement, just a crawl space for utilities, they told me, like it was a small settled fact. I believed them. They left the night before for a week-long trip and I had the house to myself. On Tuesday night, trying to fall asleep in the upstairs bedroom, I heard a tapping directly beneath my feet. It was rhythmic, steady, not the random creaks you expect in an old house. At first I blamed pipes, heating, a raccoon, anything that sounded sensible, but the noise didn't stop. The room I slept in was on the first floor, so the sound felt subterranean. I paced to find the source. It seemed to come from everywhere under the floor. It was unnerving most because, according to Mark and Claire, there was nothing livable under the house, just a crawl space. Eventually, the tapping faded and I fell asleep, convinced I'd imagined it. The next night it came back, louder. By the third night, it escalated. Tapping turned into scraping and dragging, like claws or something being pulled across concrete. My brain tried to stitch a reasonable explanation to the facts. Maybe there was a hidden utility entrance. Maybe my parents had been wrong. The sounds were too deliberate to be mere settling. I told my dad when he answered my call the next morning. He insisted I check the crawl space for animals. I didn't want to, but the entrance was under the porch, so I opened it and crawled in. Nothing. No animals, no footprints. Dad seemed relieved. I wasn't. I walked the exterior, looking for missed entries. Behind a stack of old construction debris, lumber, tarps, cinder blocks, I found a storm door, half painted over, hidden for years. It opened onto concrete steps descending into darkness. A basement. I froze. Inside, there were signs someone had been living there. Empty food containers, a makeshift blanket, and worse, carved marks on the wooden supports. Tally-like scratches on a beam, grotesque drawings on the foundation, warped figures and animal shapes, frantic and sick. I didn't stay longer than necessary. I called my parents. They were stunned. They had no idea there was a basement or that anyone had used it. Dad told me to lock it and they'd come home early. I padlocked the storm door from the outside, thinking that would end it. That night, aggressive pounding rattled the door. I watched through a window as a shadowy figure sprinted across the yard and vanished into the dark. The police searched the house thoroughly and found nothing. They promised to increase patrols. My parents returned, promised to deal with it. I left for college the next morning, but it felt wrong, leaving them there with questions we couldn't answer. A few days later, my phone stayed silent. No one reported anything new, but I can't stop thinking about those tallies and those drawings, and the certainty that someone had lived under our home for who knows how long. I sleep with the image of that carved beam in my head and the memory of the pounding on the locked door. Last August changed how I feel about camping. My name's Noah. When I was a kid, my dad Sam would take me and my brother on an end-of-summer camping trip. Just a quiet tradition to mark the shift back to school. Now I'm in my late 20s, living a normal life, but the ritual stuck. My girlfriend Ava hates camping, so most trips are solo. For this trip, I picked a remote clearing off the map. Not an official campsite, just a small opening in thick pines with a clear view of the sky. I downloaded offline maps and hiked in 2 hours, carrying everything I needed. The first night was perfect. A small fire, freeze-dried dinner, stars. The next day, I hiked to a river to try my luck fishing. I caught a decent brook trout and headed back later than I'd planned. By the time dusk fell, I'd misjudged the time. Walking back in twilight turned into navigating in full darkness. I had a headlamp, but the terrain slowed me down. Then I saw a faint light moving in the distance, like someone walking with a lantern. It was getting closer. I called out a friendly "hello," thinking maybe another camper could help. The light stopped, then snapped off. A second later, a painful, heavy crashing sounded through the underbrush. Someone sprinting fast, but not in the direction of my voice. It felt wrong. Whoever it was didn't respond. They disappeared into the dark. I made it back to my tent shaken and skipped cooking the fish. Sometime during the night, I woke and stepped outside to relieve myself. I froze. A silhouette stood about 15 feet from my tent, motionless and watching. I couldn't see details, only the outline. My survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed the small switchblade I keep by the tent flap and shouted, "Who's there?" The figure charged. No warning, just a sprint and a high, horrifying scream that didn't sound human. He slammed into me, and the world became a blur of scrambling. A man clawing at my face like an animal. I got a cut in his hand with the knife and he screamed, backing off and crashing into the trees, laughing or howling, a sound I still can't place. I sat stunned in the dark, bleeding, hands shaking, unsure whose blood was on me. Hiking out in pitch black seemed impossible, so I sat the night in the tent gripping the blade, listening for footsteps that never came. At first light I packed quietly and left, driving straight home. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I was attacked by a strange man in the woods who screamed like an animal. Would they take me seriously? I never went back. The scratches on my face healed, but the memory, the scream, the way he moved, lingers. I haven't camped alone since. Grew up in a small town near the state line, the kind of place where nothing much happens. My name's Gabe, and this happened years ago, before everyone had a phone attached to their hand. It was late August. I was driving my usual morning route, a 2-lane road slicing through fields and low hills, when I spotted a pale blue sedan pulled on the shoulder. It looked abandoned. No hazard lights, no one around. When I passed, there was still no one inside. I assumed the driver had walked to a farmhouse for help. On the drive home that evening, the same car sat in the exact same spot, but now the driver's door hung wide open. No person in sight. I called the non-emergency police line and reported it. They said they'd send someone. The next morning, the car was gone. I thought that was the end of it. A week later, the local news ran a missing person report. A vehicle found abandoned along a rural stretch outside town. The description matched the car I'd seen. The report was sparse. No foul play shown, no witnesses. It felt odd the way they glossed over details. I called my brother Tom, a firefighter nearby, to see if he'd heard anything. The station had gotten a memo from the sheriff, but no real leads. I convinced Tom to organize a small volunteer search with a few guys from the department. With permission, a handful of officers and off-duty firefighters joined us. We searched a shallow wooded area and some old irrigation ditches about a mile from the road. About an hour in, one team found a half-sunken maintenance shack hidden in brush. The door was ajar, the lock snapped. Inside, it smelled musty, but there were fresh signs of use, empty bottles, food wrappers scattered, as if someone had been living there recently. Near the back wall, a small clean hole bored through a board caught my eye. Splintered edges, perfectly shaped, like a bullet hole. We searched for casings, blood, anything, but found nothing. The officers knew this was more than a routine missing person call. The lead told us they'd take over and asked the civilians to leave. After everything calmed, the story vanished. The news never followed up, the sheriff's office gave nothing, and my brother's contacts had no details. It felt like the case was quietly shelved. Weeks later, I drove back to find the shack on my own, but there was nothing. No shack, no evidence. Either my memory betrayed me, or the structure had been completely removed. Every year when August ends, I drive that stretch of road and glance at the shoulder. I remember the abandoned car and the hole in the wood, a small, inexplicable crack in the ordinary fabric of our town. Something happened that late summer, and for reasons I cannot explain, I was only allowed a brief glimpse before it was closed off again.